our main topic here this week on Mastering Dungeons is creating a nautical campaign. Teos has buffed up on the pirate and naval milieu. This was all launched last week by an email from Pierre Borsdorf, who said that they were about to start a nautical themed 2014 campaign with 3 players and Pierre as the DM. And it was going to be based on a ship exploring islands and jungles and having adventures on the high sea. And the question was, what advice do you have about a nautical campaign? What are the pitfalls? What are the ideas that work great? We talked about all of that last week. And then we thought it would be fun to maybe plan out in our heads what a nautical campaign might be that we would run. So we are going to attempt to do that right now.
Fantastic.
Any big picture stuff before we dive into our steps and our details here, Teos?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's fun. I had some fun looking through Dungeon Magazine articles that dealt with this kind of concept, right? Like I'm holding up a really neat art of a pirate that shows up in Dragon number 318, which is April 2004. And there are neat articles that talk about what it means to be a swashbuckling campaign, what the elements of these things are. A lot of it is pirates. And interestingly, a lot of kind of neat ideas, often with a lot of class features that don't super help as the editions change. But very little that really spoke to the nautical side. So that was my interesting kind of takeaway from this, is a lot of it was things like including romance because it's the swashbuckling genre, and maybe thinking about movement and different elements. But a lot of it was more like ports and cities rather than being on boats. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And I think there's a good reason for that. And that's one of the things that we will discuss as we talk about planning out a campaign. So let's dig in. First of all, the topic I want to start with is session zeros. Right. So any campaign will have good questions that you should be asking, topics you should be covering in a session zero. With a nautical campaign like this, I think it might be even more important to dig into those questions, because you can get a feel for some of the desires, some of the questions about the campaign that would be hard to turn toward later after you've already started the campaign.
Totally.
So let's do a quick session zero refresher here. Session zeros are the session that you have with your players before the campaign starts, and probably before character creation even starts, to make sure everyone's on the same page. Everyone is going to be pleased and excited by the campaign. Everyone's going to get what they want out of the campaign within the reasonable bounds of a social structure where you can't always get what you want. But if you try, Teos, you might just find that you
get what you need.
Get what you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rolling Stones.
Yes. So, how many players are you going to have?
Yeah.
What do those players want out of this nautical themed campaign? What do you as the game master want? Always good to go in with those questions, and then you can start to compare notes.
Yeah. And if I can go to those last two you asked there, I think it's a very important balance to strike, right? You are a player. You should be having fun as GM. So you need to make sure that the things that you're presenting as options are all interesting to you, right? Don't present an option for a campaign that isn't of interest to you, right? Or if someone says, oh, I really want to do this kind of thing, we're animated cartoon pirates and you don't like that, then say, that is amazing. I love it. You should run that campaign. Let's think of other ideas because I'm not interested in running that as DM. Just say that.
There you go.
Because you have to have a blast, right? But the combo, what you're hoping for is the combo, right? Where you can say, how interested are you in your ship as a base? And they go, actually, we really love that. And you're like, cool, me too. So let's, that's an aspect we can explore in this campaign.
Yep. So you can work out those, what are the top 10 top 10? What are the top three things you really want?
Mhm.
What are maybe two things you definitely don't want? Everyone
Yeah.
brings those to the table, hash them out, and now you have a framework from which to start building. Based on that framework, you can then say to the players, tell me about the kinds of characters you want to play within this. Uh, if it's going to be very much avoiding land, everything happening on a ship or in the sea, that will dictate the kinds of characters that the players might want. Is there a species in this game that can breathe water, that have swim speeds,
Yeah.
that aren't going to be affected by that? Maybe everyone wants to play one of those types of
Yeah.
characters. To that then really tips the scales toward what kind of adventures you're going to present.
Oops, all merfolk.
And that's okay. That
Yeah.
could be
Yeah.
an absolute blast,
But you want to
but
know.
that eliminates a challenge that you are
Hmm.
going to have in your toolbox of we're going to have some combats where the characters need to swim or
Yeah.
hold their breath underwater, which could be a very tense situation as you swim down to try to get the thing you need off the bottom of the ocean while sharks are swimming around you.
Yeah.
Oh, now you have a swim speed and you can breathe water. Well, you can still fight those sharks, but it's going to be less dramatic that way.
Yeah.
So, putting together that framework will help the players decide their approach in designing characters.
Yeah. Love
Uh,
it.
then you get to the question of like, how long are the sessions going to be? How many levels are you going to be able to commit to as we play this campaign? Uh, those sorts of questions are important in any campaign, but in this nautical campaign, it could become super important as how long does a voyage take from this island to this port or vice versa?
Yeah.
Uh, are we going to have whole sessions, whole story arcs that only take place on a ship? If
Hmm.
that's the case, we might want longer sessions to get from one place to another in a complete session. If we can only go
Yeah.
for an hour, that's going to change things up.
Yeah, and I think the genre itself of sort of dealing with pirates and those kinds of opponents, you certainly can go to any levels, but you're maybe
Mm-hmm.
not going to be planes hopping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe your threats are not global threats, planet
Mm-hmm.
wide threats. So maybe that speaks to having a smaller breadth of, tighter band of levels that you're going to play for.
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy into having to do that necessarily, but I do like thinking of maybe the story is more concise. This is a shorter campaign. There are a lot of good reasons to do that. So this might be one where you kind of think to yourself, I think we're only going to go to 8th level or 10th level or whatever it is that you think, and maybe we're starting at 3rd, something like that, and that may help you have a better campaign because you know that focus.
Mm-hmm. So, one thing you're going to want to look up are the rules for swimming, the rules for holding your breath, the rules for drowning, the rules for underwater combat. Again, to go in, if you're going to have underwater or in the water combats, you want to know those rules as the game master when you run them, but also as the players when those events come up. And maybe you move the focus of your character a little more in that direction, as maybe I won't use a great axe or a great club. If I'm going to be in the water a lot, I'm going to use a spear or a crossbow. These weapons that are less hampered by underwater action.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note, and folks who are Patreon backers, you'll find the rules summarized in our show notes. But there have been some changes between 2014 and 2024 in the types of weapons. It used to be a list of weapons in 2014, and now for melee weapons, it's where they deal piercing damage.
Piercing, yep.
So it's not a list. And then ranged weapons, the attack roll has disadvantage when it's within normal range. And in 2014, it had a specific list again, and here it's different. So you want to look at those differences and figure that out. be aware of them for any encounters you design.
Mhm. And the last thing that I would talk about in the session zero is how realistic, quote unquote, do you want everything to be?
Mm.
Uh, right. Is there going to be an issue with scurvy? Is there
Mm-hmm.
going to be an issue with finding food and needing to fish uh, to get rations if you're on the trip longer than that? Is it going to be a magical ship?
Mm-hmm.
Is your
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be able to do extra dimensional space that allow you to have a full laboratory, or are you
Right.
going to restrict based on the realities of what a
Mm-hmm.
real ship of medieval or Renaissance or Elizabethan, etc. times
Yeah.
would look like? Uh, and because that can be important,
Yeah.
and the players may have things to add, and you might have things to add to that conversation as well.
Yeah, I think that question of resources is important in any campaign that involves some large amount of
Yep.
exploration. And I would think
Yep.
that there are three, for me, there are three modes. One is we don't want to deal with it at all. We will
Mhm.
always have all the food and water we need. Let's just not even worry about it. Um, Another is that there's a sort of abstract thing like you will have some amount of background, me as GM, tracking that you have food or don't, and you'll need to go out and do things and do like a hunt check of some sort, and oh look, you found something. This is how it feels that actually my pirate Borg is currently going, right? Where it's like food is an issue. What do you all want to do about that? Well, three of us will spend today out hunting. Oh look, you found a boar. You're good for a while. We're not tracking minute stuff. The third level is that minute stuff of like boxes you're writing down, like you have 5 units of survival days or whatever, and
Yep.
that is, I think that different players like different parts of that, right? You could
Yep.
also have to contend with if you have a 2014 Ranger where they can just say like, I ought to succeed on these types of things. That's important to know about.
Mhm. Okay. So you get all of that covered. You get your players telling you what they want, what they don't want. You get their characters. Do they start out as a crew? Do they come together in some way to become a crew? How did they get their ship? Do they start with one? Are they going to find one? Let's dive into level one, starting the campaign premise from there.
Yeah. So
So what do you have to say about that?
yeah, I don't know. I'm curious kind of how you approach things. Like what I often do is I'll just kind of on a piece of paper, document, whatever, I'll start sketching out kind of major things that I'm interested in. And I may have done this actually earlier so I can bounce some ideas off the players. In fact, one of the things I like to do, even before we get together physically for session zero, is to test a sort of warmth test of how much they like different things I'm thinking of putting in, right? So I might think about things like undead enemies. Um, I might do things like, ship to ship combat, um, pirates, buried treasure, right? Like I just list out all these different themes, and I may for some or all of them test kind of how interested are you, and you can do this easily with any kind of surveying
Mhm.
website. Give me a 1 to 5 on how much this interests you, and then you can see the full breadth of what your players like. Like they really love the idea of taking on pirates, right? Or maybe even being pirates. You could ask both questions. They really love the idea of exploring lost islands, right? Things like that. And that helps you direct your campaign and fine tune it. But here at this point of a campaign premise, I like to start with this sort of almost word cloud of different ideas I have,
Mhm.
and then start fine tuning to my major themes that really call out to me. What do you do? I'm curious how you approach this.
I would do that very similarly. I love a campaign where the characters start as certainly no pun intended here, fish out of water,
Uh-huh.
right? Where they start with they're heroes, but they're not perfect within the milieu in which they're set.
Mm-hmm.
So I would want to start with them being just regular characters. Have backstories,
Mm-hmm.
have something that ties them to a port, have them something
Mm-hmm.
that ties to an island or a set of islands, but not being sailors per se.
Mm-hmm.
and have it start with you are thrust into this situation. And at the end of that situation at first level, you have a ship and
Mm,
you have a reason to use it
mm,
as a group.
mm, mhm,
And so then once they set sail, they are, we're now telling fun stories about them learning the ways of the sea.
mm,
And anything that they do from now on makes sense to become a better sailor, a
mhm.
better fisherman, a better survivor of the of the great waves. Well, I want that tension to play out. So
Yeah.
I want there to be a few funny moments where they're trying to climb the rigging and they're
Uh-huh.
failing miserably and they're
Yeah.
falling off into the water, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I like that because one of the problems that happens in a campaign when you are supposed to be an expert when you're new is the player versus character side of it,
Yeah.
where the player is discovering what it means to be a character on a boat, but the character is
Mhm.
supposed to be an expert. Then that creates a disconnect, and we talked about this like when we talked about uh, Witchlight, the adventure, where it starts
Yeah.
you off with this premise of you might work at the carnival, but
Yeah.
you as a player don't know what the carnival is, right? And so, similarly here, if you're supposed to have already had a life as a pirate, that makes it so they should know all these things that the player doesn't know, and maybe even the GM doesn't know. So starting new can really help with that.
Yep. Yep. So I would start there, and then I would want to get the characters as soon as possible onto the water.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Onto the water at the lowest level possible where they have the least amount of abilities, feats, everything to throw at their problems.
Yeah.
Again, to show this learning process and to take the theme of the campaign and ground it right away. If the theme is going to be
Mm-hmm.
there is this evil that's spreading around these various islands, and that evil is spreading onto the sea, you're going to start by dealing with the evil on the sea. So we're going to have lots of the ship being attacked either by creatures that can swim or fly or by creatures on other ships. We're going to get all of that right happening as soon as possible.
Yeah, and even if you are going to grow the mystery over time and you're going to hint at it,
Mhm.
you want it to like be on a gradient towards that, right? So
Yeah.
don't start with a bunch of goblins if you're never going to use them later, or
Mhm.
or have the goblins tie into it somehow, but don't just be a disconnect and later there'll be a phase 2. It's
Mhm.
better when it goes towards that angle, right? So like for
Yep.
example, it could be that there are goblins who are rushing to these islands because of whatever has happened to them elsewhere. Or they're rushing to the mainland because of what's happened to them elsewhere. Or they have taken to become pirates for some reason. What is that reason? And that will lead you towards whatever this great evil is, right? So you want to have that gradient that starts taking you towards the main arcs of play.
Mhm.
And I think
So the first, oh, go ahead.
yeah, just to say that there are a lot of different campaign styles you can approach. And I think one of the things that I wrestle with in this very beginning piece with my premise is, am I going, for example, with Jason and the Argonauts, right? Where we're going to travel across and visit all these different places, trying to accomplish something. And then after this long voyage return, um, are we coming in and out? And in that case, our ship is basically our home, right?
Mhm.
For all intents and purposes, even though we have this other home, our ship becomes really our true home, and that works well in a nautical campaign to have your ship be your home. Another option is that you're always going out of your base, and so whatever that port city is, we now want to create ties to that. If we're based off of this, we want to care about it, return to it, see how it progresses, how it's impacted by our actions, and
Yep.
that may lead itself to the type of campaign where we do a lot of missions, right? Going out to
Mhm.
different things, checking out, following some patrons' impulses, something like that, right? Um, or it could be that we are going to establish a base early on somewhere in this area that's new to us, and that could be fun too.
Yeah. This is where the length of your sessions comes in for me.
Mm,
If I know that this is something I run on my lunch break and I have 60 minutes, right? I am going to either do the adventure of the week, the Star Trek, right? The ship
Yep.
is going through. Oh, you've come across an island. There's one thing you need to do on this
Yeah.
island, and it needs
Yeah.
to happen really quickly. Or you're going on your ship through the water, and something comes to you, and you deal with that. If I have regular 4 hour sessions, then I can see the sailing to a place, the dealing with the thing on the island and then leaving, or just continuing to have 4 or 5 adventures on that
Yeah.
island as you get to the bottom of what is happening there. In that case, each island you go to could be its own story arc and introduce one more step toward the sort of overall evil, the overall goal of the campaign.
Yeah, and talking about that overall goal, we think about our premise, but we think about then also our larger campaign structure. Um, I have in
Mhm.
general found that when I wing a campaign, that is, build as I go, I am no
Mhm.
George R. R. Martin, or maybe I am, in that I eventually I go, wait, what am I doing? And
Uh-huh.
because I didn't think it far enough ahead. And so my campaigns
Yeah.
are a lot better when I know where I'm going to go. And so I think through that what is the story we're trying to tell here, that the
Mhm.
players can, interact with and shape. Is there the dread pirate king that's come back from the dead because they're cursed, and the major arc will be finding out what that curse is and ending it, at the heart of the volcano or what it might be. I start thinking of those
Mhm.
kinds of ideas. Oh, that could be really cool. Or maybe there are 3 different things that have to be done in 3 islands, and you can do them in any order. And they're all
Mhm.
threats, but there is no central one theme, or maybe it's
Yep.
missions that we're doing every week. Thinking through what that structure is for the campaign
Mhm.
um, really helps, right? If in the end we're going to find that it's our very patron that is the villain, well, then I need to know that ahead of time and plan for it and have that be satisfying versus not, which is a tough one. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah, and as you say in our notes, what you're talking about is building top down there. Starting with the end, starting with what's
Yeah.
the overarching theme, enemy, structure, and then letting that filter down into the
Hmm.
individual adventures and even individual encounters based on that. Now, me,
Yeah.
I'm going with something at the bottom of the ocean that is the big
Mm.
evil,
Ooh.
the dead god that's awakening at the
Yeah.
bottom, because I want my characters to be in the water at the end. I want them
Mm.
to have to overcome that sort of challenge where they're finding the artifacts that let them breathe water, that
Yeah.
will let them get down there so they don't have to rely on that.
Yeah,
Yep.
Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which I'm holding up, it has the styes. I think is the last of the
Mhm.
adventures in the series, and they're kind of loosely a series, but in this book are kind of patched together as one, and the styes deals with abolithic type horrors and
Yep.
that's a great way to end it, right? With what was behind all of it. Oh, it's these dark forces, and you can do that by having elements as you think through this kind of a campaign. You could have cultists and other things, and
Mhm.
then show this is not cultists above ground that we just have to worry about. We have to worry about truly terrible creatures in the deep.
Yeah. Yeah, we're sort of covering some of our questions as we go. Like, what is the low level foes encounters, fun ways to start and grow? What are the mid level encounters? What are
Yeah.
then what's upper level and a good way to end? And it all ties together.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
for you, upper level maybe sixth level if you're running a short campaign.
Yeah.
So, but you can think about it, set it to match the scope of what you have planned.
Yeah, and your style as DM, like if you like to level every single session, or even at the not quite, it's a little slower, but the official progression that's in the 2024 and 2014, like you advance pretty quickly. And so is that kind of what's
Mhm.
happening? Advancing, if not every session, close to every other. That means the power level's changing very quickly, and what kind of foes you're fighting will progress very quickly. And we talked about when we looked at encounters and monsters with pirates, in that episode. We noted that these pirates are sort of like the pirate boss at various levels, but it
Mhm.
may not quite fit what you need in any given, how to use these in encounters. Well, as your characters fly through levels, then that'll become hard to do. So you're either going to have to feel comfortable scaling them using something like Forge of Foes to,
Yep.
shape it, or you've got to think through ahead of time, like, okay, my pirate can only come in this area where we're playing, and then it's got to be, all the other types of NPCs and monsters and things that I throw at them because they have limited applicability, in the
Mhm.
campaign, which is tough.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And that's where, as Teo said, you might need to, if you really want to go high level and still have pirates be a threat, you have to get imaginative and
Hmm.
how can I take this dragon stat block and make it a pirate?
Yeah.
Right? What does this pirate have?
Yeah, and that's where thinking through your campaign arc and from not just the story perspective, but the construction perspective is helpful, right? Where you might say, okay, Dread Pirate King works because there are a lot of powerful undead creatures that I could use, right? It could be a Death Knight, it
Mhm.
could be whatever. You can think through these things. It could be, this named NPC that's in the monster manual that's very high CR if I'm going very high level. But you could also
Mhm.
think, what if each of the three islands has a dormant dragon? And only by defeating all three can we blah, right? Well, then
Mhm.
now you've got foes that scale pretty easily because we've got lots of
Yep.
types of dragons and they have lots of age categories. And that becomes a much easier thing to do as DM, even if the characters run around the map doing different things and level differently than you expect. Well, now you've got
Mhm.
your age categories and some minor tweaking. You can probably make those encounters work.
What do you think, Teos, of changing the scope of the campaign, the flow of the campaign as you go? So you start fighting the pirates, you find the threats on the islands.
Mhm.
Does it work for you as a player and a game master to have the first three levels be this very sea based thing and then switch to land based
Mm.
without ever going back? Or do you feel like you need to go back to give the campaign sort of a thread that runs throughout?
Yeah, I think that in the type of campaign we're talking about, where you're selling me on a nautical campaign, then I
Mhm.
need to be on my ship every so often. So
Yeah.
a little more like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, right, where they are
Mhm.
often on the ship, then they land, things happen, then they're on the sea, things happen on the sea, and so you want to find ways to make that fun, right? Maybe you cross the land and in a temple you find this ship in a bottle that now allows you to go into this magical ocean to solve a thing. So you're on a ship again. Even when you weren't near your ship, we've got a reason why you can be on a ship again, and it's the magical ship that
Mhm.
was in a bottle, right? Like just
Cool.
finding ways to extend that experience and keep coming back to it because that matters to us, right? Or the magic bottle that lets you put your ship in it so you can bring
Mhm.
your ship
Mhm.
with you and now
Yeah.
pop out your ship because maybe a part of the game was customizing our ship.
Mhm.
And the more that you do that, the more that you invest in an aspect, well, you want to come back to it. I'm also a firm believer in coming back to your home because it grounds you. Nautical campaign.
Mhm.
It gives you something that you care about. It gives you NPCs. So the more that you care about the NPCs that are your crew on your ship, and you have relationships with them, and you're assigning them to do things, and you're planning things around your ship. Since your ship matters, it's totally great to go onto the island and explore, but we need to come back to that ship or at least hear about what happens with it. And so some way to link back to your home is really important in a campaign.
It sounds like you're going Acquisitions Incorporated mode here, where you have your franchises, your ship. And if you go on the land, you can still run adventures on your ship with the
Yeah.
NPCs that you've
Yeah.
left there.
Yeah, you could. You could. I mean, I always love that kind of play, right? And I think that as I play a lot more of adventures, this idea of having where you just keep going away from whatever you theoretically started caring about is a little weird, unless you are doing like Jason and the Argonauts, where we always move around,
Right.
right? But
Mhm.
yeah, it's good to have that basis of where you came from, and you should care about it. So,
Mhm. Any other thoughts before we shut this ship down?
um, yeah, let's see. Some things that I could say is just inspiration, right? So I mentioned there are a number
Mhm.
of dragon magazines that talk about, uh, you know, 273 is another dragon magazine that has some really nice articles, including by fine folks like Robin Laws. I looked at the DMGs and I thought it was interesting. The 2014 DMG has a section on unusual environments. You and I reviewed
Mhm.
the DMG, so folks can look at that if they
Yep.
want to. And it's useful to an extent in framing through, okay, how do I make the unusual environment of ships work? In 2024, we get generic information that is, I think, very good information on how to make a campaign, how to make an adventure, how to make encounters.
Mhm.
But all that nautical stuff is removed. There is no unusual environment section. It didn't, move to the to the itemized section or anything like that. It's really because like ship rules are now in the player's handbook.
Mhm. Yep.
So that expertise, you'll have to look elsewhere for it if you want that, which I thought was interesting. Ghosts of Saltmarsh has all kinds of additional rules on nautical things, ways to trick out your ship. So that kind of
Mhm.
is I think useful. And then just inspiration in general, right? Pirates of the Caribbean, pulp genre overall, right? Anything Indiana Jones type stuff, right? That's all
Mhm.
helpful. Ship combat rules, I would look at Esper Genesis and even Star
Mhm.
Trek 2D20 for how it handles ship combat, and you could bring that in. There are a bunch of really fun fourth edition pirate themed adventures: Captain Silgo's Treasure, the Dread Pirate Braxis, classic adventures like the Isle of Dread. There's some neat concepts you can have there. Skull and Shackles for Pathfinder. Lots of third party fifth edition settings like Seas of Voldari by the Tribality Group. Um,
Mhm.
Vodari, I should say. Those are all worth looking at for influences.
Awesome. Well, with that, it is time to shut this, batten down the hatches. Storms are coming. We need to move on and sail away, but we wouldn't want to leave our listeners stranded. So we are going to say thank you to everybody out there listening. And if you would like to support the show, you can do so via our Patreon at patreon.com/masteringdnd. We have a ton of people who already support us as Master of Dungeons supporters. We thank you for that. Our Master of the Realm supporters have a shout out here in our show notes. And our Masters of the Multiverse, they get a special shout out from me, starting from the bottom with Zawald Winfrey, Zach Types, Chris Webster, Waterford Wizard, Javier Waziak, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Graham Ward, James Walton, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, Joe Tyler, Tres, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Spark from Dunor Games, Tim Smith, Krishna Samosa, Andy Shockney, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Runner Rick, Ozymandias Rex, Pugnus, Vladimir Prunner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Frog Prince, at Tentacles Squelching Wetly, Philip and Lindsay, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Tom Nelson, creator of the Deck of Player Safety, Falcon Neal, Sean Molly, Mighty Zeus, John Mickey, Trey McLemore, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Eric Mengi, The Math Magician, Paul Mata, Chad Lench, Jim Klingler, Brian King, JR of the Twilight Perspective, The Mighty Jerd, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, Hyperlexic, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Laitman, William Harshman of Runeforge Tabletop Gaming, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, James Fisher, Andy Edmonds at NerdRoNomicon.com, Will Doyle, Evan at Nimble Co., Evil John, Dead Inertia DM, Kevin Criswell, Robo Ballin, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Dave Bastiensen, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Keith Emmon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and Agile Monk of Fantasy Campaign and Companion Workshops. I always get that wrong. Thank you so much for your support. You can also help us out by leaving us a review wherever you listen to this show or by going to YouTube at youtube.com/ at mastering dungeons, and you can subscribe and like and do all of those things that help us out. Teos, where are you and what you been up to?
Ooh, you can find me at alphastream.org. My latest blog was on the different play tests for fifth edition,
Mm-hmm.
comparing and contrasting them and what we can learn from those. I had a lot of fun digging into the data. Then on YouTube, you can find What Kind of DM Are You? And that walks through kind of self analysis and what we can learn from saying, gee, what really do I like to do? And what is my approach? Where do we find you,
Awesome.
Shawn?
You can find me on at Sean Merwin on all the socials. You can follow the podcast at Mastering D&D on all those same places. And of course, always go to the YouTube channel to find out what we have been up to. So we have planned part of a campaign on the high seas. What are we going to do now?
Hmm. I think that we've got to think about how we create that awesome encounter where we end up on like a inflatable rubber dinghy kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I am going to go blow up my inflatable rubber dinghy.